Hi, and welcome to the Not an Island podcast.
This is the podcast series where we talk about faith, family, and autism, and that little corner of the world where all of that meets. We are your hosts, Todd, and
Amanda.
we're the Johnsons. And in today's episode, what do we have, Amanda? What are we talking about?
So we just decided to wingy. But I really thought it was vital and important to share Ezra's journey and kind of his story with everyone.
Yeah.
We could start all the way back at birth if you want
Way
to.
back.
Way back.
All right. So, those of you who know us know, but those of you who don't, I was active duty military for 7 years. We were stationed overseas my whole career. And over in the big island of Guam, Hoffa, if you're from Guam, what's up?
Hoffa Guam.
Uh, yeah, we spent 3 years over there, and Amanda couldn't get pregnant. We were having a little bit of an issue for a few years,
Fertility issues, hormone issues, a lot.
and Amanda had a dream one day as I was out processing at the end of my enlistment. Amanda had a dream where
the Lord gave me a dream, and in that dream, he told me that he was going to heal my body and that I was going to have a son named Ezra Daniel. And I woke up like, what? Because the doctors were saying the opposite of that. And I think the Lord had to really kind of take me on a journey that I had way too much stake and bank in what the doctors had said. And so it led me on a journey of faith to believe him for what he had promised me. And within a few months of just praying and believing, within a short period of time, I was pregnant with Ezra.
Yeah. And literally, not exaggerating, the day that I came home with orders in hand, which those of you who are military or know someone who's military is close to you, once you have your orders, it's like the point of no return, right? So the day I came home with orders in hand, I walk home and she's holding a positive.
When he says orders, he means orders that said we were separating from the military.
Like it's like
we were going home.
You can't turn around. This is it.
This is it.
You're making the big jump. No more health care from
Uncle Sam.
All that. No home to go to, all of that. And she was holding a positive pregnancy test.
Yeah.
And I just about fainted.
Because we were okay with obeying God, just the two of us going home to nothing and starting over. Yeah, but this was it kind of threw a whole new aspect into it. But we knew what God had told us to do, and he already knew. He had already told me about Ezra beforehand, so he knew.
Fast forward 8 months, you had been having some issues with blood pressure. You had preeclampsia pretty bad. It was spiking and dipping and spiking and dipping.
It was at the very end of my pregnancy. I honestly had other than the morning sickness, I had a very healthy pregnancy. It was at the very end, I just started to have my blood pressure just go up out of nowhere.
Yeah, and then here came Ezra at 8 months. 8 months gestation, which means he was a month early. He was, and you would not know it by the size and development that this child has now. He is an absolute unit. But when he was a newborn, I remember I could literally hold him in my hand, and his feet were hanging off my wrist, and his head was barely.
Both he and his brother were born at the exact same time, a month early, and they were both extremely healthy and big.
Massive. So I'm glad they didn't make it 9 months.
I know.
Wow.
Been 10-pound babies.
Regardless, Ezra had a lot of difficulties even at birth.
Yeah, it was so traumatic. It was a traumatic delivery, an emergency delivery where they couldn't get the spinal in my back, and so they knocked me out.
He was going into distress as well.
He was going into distress, and so it was an emergency thing. And I'll say right away, bringing Ezra home from the hospital, we didn't know what to expect. We were brand spanking new parents who never had a baby before. What are you going to say?
1 second. When she says bring him home, we'll post a picture up right here. When she says home, she literally means a 10-foot by 8-foot Home Depot shed that was about, Would you say 20 years old?
Outside my parents' house. I don't know how old it was. Yeah. We called the Love Shack.
The Love Shack. They didn't like that, but it's all right.
We really thought God would everything would just be set up real quickly, but there was a process of faith. That's a whole nother story.
That's a whole nother story.
But he provided every single thing we needed every step of the way. And that's a whole
literally
story.
When you would get out of our full-size bed between two full-grown adults, we would get out of this full-size bed, and when you would sit your feet on the ground to put your boots on to go to work, at my job that God blessed me with, my knees were literally touching Ezra's bassinet.
Yeah. You know, he was born in a manger.
Born in a manger. Yeah, that's pretty much it. But it was
no hair animals.
Yeah, that season was so beautiful, though.
It really was. It was such a precious time. It was also the most difficult, probably one of the most difficult times of my entire life. His babyhood.
Ezra did not sleep.
He did not sleep. From the moment that we brought him home from the hospital, everybody says you're not going to sleep, but he woke up every 15 minutes and he just screamed and screamed and screamed.
And we would take turns every 15 minutes.
We'd bounce him and try everything we could to soothe him. Turned out he had he was holding the milk down, which is not normal with lactose intolerance and a dairy protein allergy, but he started to poo-poo blood, TMI. But then they realized, okay, he's got both of these allergies. And it was like the damage was done in his gut because we were having to feed him formula because I had been so ill that I wasn't producing enough to feed him. And so yeah, that was the beginning of his life.
It was a
really,
very
really
traumatic
hard.
life. 8 months we had an emergency. We won't go into all that in this episode, but
I mean we can it's part of his journey. At 8 months old he was life flighted.
Yep, he was life flighted.
He got extremely ill and ran a really high fever and was misdiagnosed several times. And he got in the emergency room. We were there from 6 a.m. and he got severely dehydrated, and they weren't able to get an IV in him, and so they had to drill into his shin bone and send us to Dallas. And we nearly lost Ezra at 8 months old. That was very life-threatening and is a critical condition. And
if you're curious, that's where our first song that we have on iTunes. That's like the first.
They may not even know we do that.
Yeah, you probably don't know. It's not a big deal at all, but it is. It's our first song, and the song message is still, it hits home for us. But
it's just been like an anthem over Ezra's life. The Lord literally told me in the hospital room one night when he was so ill that he could barely move. He just said, Amanda, even when it looks like nothing's happening, everything's happening. Like up here, just I need you to come up here and see. And that just shifted my heart and my mind. And I was like, if you're saying this, then that's what I have to do. And so much of Ezra's life, he's reminded me, you can't look at what
circumstantial
is going on right now. I've promised you something more, and you need to come up and see him like I'm seeing him. So
absolutely. So he was 10 months old at the time.
He was 8 months old when he got
8 months old at the time. Fast forward, things started to turn around for him. He started to show some signs of, at that age, it's hard to tell what a kid is going at.
And I'll also say he was very ill from a young age. 2 months old, he got RSV, and he just was continually sick with things, and we were continually in and out of the emergency room, continually just dealing with, and we didn't know, like, that's not really normal. Either. Yeah. But yeah, at a year old, despite all odds against all the things that he had been through, he was developing. Typically, he was still in normal range with everything. And I think we said this in another one, but
he was hitting developmental milestones. He was saying words, like full-blown words, and showing signs of communication that were on par or ahead with his peers.
And I'm going to go ahead and say this, even though I know it's controversial, and please don't come for me or Todd, or we're not going to get into the whole thing. But Ezra's regression was immediately following his 18-month. It was actually his 12-month vaccinations that he got at 18 months.
Because he was so sick.
He had been so sick.
First year we were behind.
And yeah, so he got the vaccinations and ran a really high fever. And listen, this is not a anti-vax, pro-vax. We're do whatever you feel like is best for your child. But this is what happened with ours. And He ran a really high fever, and the doctors even classified it as a vaccine injury with what happened, because it was such a severe reaction to.
He ran super high fever, turned
into a zombie. It was super lethargic. And
that lethargy lasted for over a year. It was like he was a zombie pretty much for.
We lost all eye contact. We lost every word he ever spoke. And I would say, even still, I would say they say that the 18-month regression happens despite vaccinations. It's just a thing with autism. And there were things before that, very well could have led it. It was like the perfect storm kind of thing.
Yeah,
so
I would say the vaccine, we don't blame, in my opinion, was the straw that broke the camel's back.
There was just a lot
of other straws
things
on that back before. But regardless,
we're not trying to start a war.
That's in the end.
Hide nor hair.
Yeah, exactly. Like the truth is, he is who he is, and the Lord made him fearfully and wonderfully, and we accept him for who he is. So I just want to lay that disclaimer out there with all of these things we're talking about.
Yeah.
But that happened at around 18 months. And then the rest of his life, 3 years old,
so just before a year old, we contacted a local therapy, in-home therapy service that went till he was 3 years old, called Opportunities. And he started early intervention. I just want to say that. He started right away because we were super proactive. We were desperate.
We had noticed the delays starting to show their head.
Yeah. So he had a solid, I say before he was a year old. It was probably like a year and a half old until he was 3. He was in early intervention, speech, occupational therapy, and physical therapy.
I'm sorry if our timelines are off. Our son is almost 7 years old now, so we're trying to figure things out as we talk. But so that happened, and then around 2, somewhere around there, his pediatrician worked with us to get an evaluation done at Children's Hospital. And there is a massive waiting list, and we won't get into all that, but there is a massive waiting list. And we managed to make it to another children's hospital. In our own home state instead.
Yeah. We were on a wait list for a year and a half
in another state,
and a local therapist was telling me, "Hey, Amanda, there's another option. You should talk to your pediatrician." And they were like, "Well, you've already been on this wait list this long. If you get off, you can't get back on it."
Yeah, we weren't having it,
and we weren't having it. We fought. We're not going to wait 4 years. Like, we need. And then,
well, hold up. Before we go any further, we didn't know, and you may not know if you have a young child, you can be on multiple waiting lists. Mm-hmm. It's not one or nothing. You can be on multiple waiting lists. Yeah. So a lot of times doctors won't do it because they just don't feel like it's necessary. But if you are the child's parent and you are ultimately their voice. So if you voice that enough and say, "Look, my child needs help and I want to get this intervention done as early as possible."
Yeah.
You can be on multiple lists.
And I also just want to say this. So we're talking a lot of practical things right now, but emotionally for Todd and I, we did not want this to be so. Everything in us, we didn't know what that meant. We had never dealt with. I mean, I had worked with children with autism actually, and when we were stationed in Germany, and I fell in love with them, and I'm so grateful because I do believe that the Lord prepared my heart and mind even to raise a son, and it just touches me. But in that point in time, we were so clueless as to what that meant. Mm-hmm. We're afraid for his future. We're afraid for everything, and we're just like holding on to Jesus, like, "Please, Lord, we don't understand this, and don't let this be." And we were in a faith community, like so many of you are, who are like, don't accept a diagnosis, believe, the Lord, trust him. And that's, I'm not saying that that's bad advice. But you have to take care of things in the natural as well as the spiritual, and not feel any guilt for that. I just want to say that.
I think it's something that you said before, and I don't want to cause issues, but it's important to bring up if a child had a disability that was visible,
right,
those same people would not be saying don't accept that diagnosis.
yeah,
Okay, your child has no legs. Okay, someone can't come up to you and say, well, don't accept the diagnosis that they don't have legs, right? Now, you can say to yourself, listen, this disability will not define my child.
100%.
That's very important.
And you can believe for legs to grow back. Okay, we serve the God of the impossible. What's that little guy who doesn't have any arms or legs and he preaches and he says he keeps a wristwatch, and a pair of shoes in his closet? Mm-hmm. We can believe for the impossible, but also deal with what is happening right in front of us. Mm-hmm. Anyways, I don't know.
That's important, and know that Jesus is in all of that, right. All of the above.
You don't hear people saying that to parents of children with Down syndrome who are clearly missing a chromosome, or is it an extra chromosome or they're missing one?
I'm unsure. I know I'm not an expert. Of chromosomal mutation.
Please don't judge me. But they have, usually a physical where it's physically able to be seen. Whereas autism, I can't tell you the amount of times I've heard people say this, and it's so ignorant to say, please don't say this. Oh, but he doesn't look like he has autism. And you're like, oh, what does that even mean? What does autism look like? What does that even mean?
Well, point being that your child was fearfully and wonderfully made, regardless of what their ability or disability is. For us, we didn't understand autism. Yeah. She knew it a little more than I did. My extent of understanding autism was, I've seen Rain Man, the movie, and so
so many people. Not and so
everyone, when you say, "Oh, my kid has autism," they'd say, "Oh, they're a savant. They can play piano really well, or they can count really well, or I can take them to the casino and make a lot of money." No, that's But at the end of the day, we were learning what we were dealing with.
Yes.
And because of that, I want to bring this up very shortly, very quickly, is that, okay, when you find out you're having a child, you have a thought in your head of what that kid's going to do. I'm going to take this kid fishing. He's going to be my camping buddy, or for her, whatever that may be. Yeah. For 3.5 years of my life, my son couldn't say, I love you. Couldn't say a single word, actually. Almost 4 years. So that didn't look the way that I thought it would. And I want to say this without offending. It might be impossible to do this, but just hear my heart that I had to mourn the loss of a thought.
Yeah.
And that thought being the child I thought I was going to raise. And instead, I was faced with the truth that I would have a child that's different than what I thought. So I had to mourn the loss of a thought.
I think for many people, that's the first step to really learning, to really accepting their child.
Yeah,
you have to mourn that. You have to let that go and get that out of the way. And so don't feel guilty if you just got a diagnosis and that's how you're feeling.
It's a natural part of the process. But I do want to say this. We are here for hope and encouragement. I want to tell you this. Be encouraged to know that the child you have is 10 times the child you thought you would have.
Yeah.
It's 10 times the child you thought you would have. I cannot express the amount of ways, the amount of times that Ezra has blown me away, changed my life forever. That God has used Ezra. The joy that He's brought. It's been wonderful.
Timeline-wise, and what we were talking about, we were fighting for diagnosis, and then COVID hit.
Yep.
And we got into this other clinic. We fought, and everything shut down. Their actual parking lot became a drive-through testing for COVID. And
for Dallas-Fort Worth.
It was impossible to get in there.
Ridiculous.
And so we actually had our very first, it wasn't a formal diagnosis, but it was pretty much a diagnosis via FaceTime or whatever it was, Skype, FaceTime, something. And we got the news, I think it was April 2020. And then we went back that fall, finally.
In October to get the official.
And we got the official diagnosis. And until you get the official diagnosis, you can't get all, there's a lot of things that open up to you. Thank God he was already in early intervention and been in therapy. At that point in time in 2020, nobody was in therapy. So he had nearly a year out of therapy. But that was a beautiful season for our family nonetheless.
It's important to say this as well, to take a pause and just say, like, we felt guilt. I know I did. I felt guilty at times. Like, should I be taking my son to be evaluated for a disorder that might change everything? I had a hard time accepting that that's what was going on.
I wanted it to be a speech delay. Yeah. If you're there, yeah. I wanted it to be a speech delay so bad. I wanted it to be anything but that because I didn't understand it.
But like she said, getting that diagnosis officially on paper, I have like a half-inch thick packet from a neurologist and a clinical psychologist signed off on, saying, yes, your son has autism, and here's the traits, and here's what's going on. And let me tell you, it opened us up to a world of, I want to say services, but there's been a lot of things that have helped us out, a lot of people who have helped us out.
Well, and that's where we found out, I think the most hard news to hear of all of it is, no, he's not high functioning at that point. He is the lowest of the low functioning. At that point, he was and still is severely autistic.
Yeah.
And that was even harder, I think, to swallow for us. But it was like, you know what? We have to move forward, and we have to keep believing for him and keep doing all the things we can do to make him the best Ezra he can possibly be. So.
Absolutely. And so that happened around 3 years old, and then COVID hit and shut down the whole world for about 2 years. And during that 2 years, our son blossomed.
Yeah.
Our son turned
into... He thrived.
Oh, man. Like, just this.
He thrived. He wasn't even in therapy. And so much joy. And he did really well.
He really did. He was at home therapies.
After that, once it opened back up.
Yeah, once everything opened back up. I don't know. That time was just a whirlwind because COVID was kind of our little time to shut away and relearn what it means to be
and I would
the family that we should be.
I don't know if we're going to run over time, but I would say a big part of Ezra's story is in the beginning of 2021, end of 2020, but the very beginning of 2021, we found out we were pregnant with Justice. Mm-hmm. And Justice is Ezra's little brother. The Lord gave me his name years before and told me about Justice. And there was never a time that our family needed justice like we did then. And I'm telling you, having a little brother for Ezra, if you're scared of having a sibling, please don't be afraid, because the Lord blessed us in a way that we couldn't have imagined. Justice brought life into Ezra. He became a big brother. Mm-hmm. And even though it's hard for him to make attachment, and not so much now, he gets very attached to people.
He's so attached.
But then it might have been hard socially, but it taught him so much, and the responsibility aspect of having a little brother and a built-in playmate for life. And
it teaches him social skills that he's going to need in the future. Like yesterday, he accidentally shut Justice's hand in the door, and Justice, he was crying so bad, and Ezra walked up to Justice and he got in his face and was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry, baby brother." And it was just so beautiful to see that our son was able to appropriately and correctly ascertain what was happening emotionally. It's a big deal for a child his age.
Having relationship with a sibling like that has been a huge thing. Todd, I think we should make this part 1 and do part 2 and share more recent things about Ezra and all of his obsessions and his loves and all that. Yeah, this is part 1. I think there's more to this.
We lost video for those of you who are wondering
what had happened.
But regardless, we're going to wrap this up this time around, and we'll hit you guys on the next one on part 2, right, Amanda?
Yeah, part 2.
All right. So listen, this was a little bit different of a flow than our 3-point topics, but regardless, if you guys are impacted by what we're talking about, or if it's something that can ring true with you, or maybe you have something that you would like to share with us, please reach out to us at
for sure.
notanislandpodcast@gmail.com. That's the title of our podcast at gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to be able to reach back out to you. So be sure to do that. Also, please rate, review, subscribe, follow our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, wherever you're listening to this. It really helps us out. It helps to get the message out there. So there's a lot of people who feel like they are an island.
Yeah. Send it to someone who needs it.
Yeah. Send it to someone who needs it. Help them out. And all right, guys. Well,
God bless you guys.
God bless y'all. I'm Todd.
I'm Amanda.
And until next time, we
Peace
love y'all.
out.
Peace.
Bye.